the Duke came to court her sister. He arrived at Thornfeld Manor on a Friday morning in the last week of September, 1811, with the full expectation of a man who had already made his decision and considered the visit a formality. He did not expect to leave watching the other one instead. The arrangement had been brokered by Mrs. Dalworth, a woman of 63, who had orchestrated more advantageous matches in Derbyshire than anyone currently living, and who regarded the unmarried state of the Duke of Ashworth as a personal failing of the county itself. She had identified Rosalind Kellaway as the ideal candidate with the precision of a jeweler, selecting a stone for a particular setting. Rosalind was beautiful, the kind of beautiful that entered a room before she did and remained after she left. She had pale hair and an excellent figure, and the effortless social grace of a woman trained from childhood to be exactly what any given room required of her. She sang. She painted watercolors. She was, by every available measure, perfect. Her father, Clement Kellaway, had built his fortune in textile manufacturing, Lancashire mills, shrewd contracts, a talent for occupying the correct market 6 months before anyone else recognized it existed. The fortune was substantial and new. The manor was not. Thornfeld had been purchased 3 years prior, a Derbyshire estate of considerable beauty and respectable lineage, the kind of property that announced to the county, "We intend to stay." The Duke of Ashworth, Soren Vole, was 31, unmarried, and in possession of an estate that had been in his family since the reign of Henry VII, but had been in financial decline since approximately the reign of his father, who had possessed extraordinary taste and no fiscal restraint whatsoever. The debts were not ruinous, they were persistent, and they carried the cumulative weight of things deferred rather than resolved. And Soren had spent 6 years since his father's death managing them with the grim discipline of a man clearing someone else's wreckage. He needed a wealthy wife. Mrs. Dalworth had a wealthy candidate. The geography was convenient. What Mrs. Dalworth had not mentioned, because she did not consider it relevant, was that Clement Kellaway had 2 daughters. Soren arrived at 10:30. The house was handsome, Georgian, well kept, the grounds showing the careful attention of an owner who understood that land was tended, not merely held. He noted this the way he noted everything, quietly, precisely, and before anyone had opened their mouth to tell him what to think. He was shown to the drawing room. Kellaway was there, solid and direct, with the handshake of a man who had spent 40 years in rooms where handshakes were contracts. Mrs. Dalworth was arranged on the settee with the supervisory precision of a conductor who trusted her musicians but kept the baton visible. And Rosalind was standing by the window in pale blue, a mourning dress selected, he understood immediately, for exactly this effect. She curtsied with technical perfection. She smiled with calibrated warmth. "Your Grace," Rosalind said. "Miss Kellaway," he said. And then the door opened, and the other daughter walked in. She came through the door with a stack of ledgers under one arm and a pen still in her hand, and she was halfway across the room before she registered that it contained 4 people and a social occasion she had not been informed of. She stopped. She was not beautiful in the way Rosalind was beautiful. She was striking in a different register. Dark hair pulled back with the efficiency of someone who considered hairstyling an obstacle to work, a dress of deep burgundy chosen for function rather than impression, and eyes that catalogued the room with the rapid attention of a person taking inventory. Those eyes landed on him and held. "Ah," Kellaway said, "Your Grace. My elder daughter, Jessamine." Among other things, Jessamine said. She shifted the ledgers. She did not curtsy. "Your Grace." "Jessamine is fine," she said. "There are 2 of us. Precision is useful." Something moved at the edge of his attention, not the words, but the architecture behind them. A social complexity solved in a single sentence without apology or performance. At luncheon, she sat across from him and said very little. Once, during a pause, she said without looking up, "The Ashworth Bridge at Cordon. Has the county approved the repair funding, or is it still in committee?" Still in committee. The south abutment has been deteriorating for 2 seasons. If it fails before winter, the freight route diverts through Hartswell, 4 additional miles and a toll. Kellaway cleared his throat. Mrs. Dalworth's expression underwent a subtle adjustment. Rosalind continued to smile. Soren thought, "She knows my bridge." The private interview took place in Kellaway's study. Rosalind sat across from him, composed and prepared. He told her his requirements: fortune, grace, competence, a woman who understood the demands of the position. "I understand completely, Your Grace," Rosalind said. Her smile did not waver. He left Thornfeld at 4 o'clock. It was not that Rosalind was wrong. She was, by every measure he had established, exactly right. It was that the woman with the ledgers had known about his bridge. He returned to Thornfeld the following Tuesday, which was sooner than Mrs. Dalworth had recommended, and sooner than propriety strictly required. And he told himself it was because the matter was time-sensitive, and decisions of this nature benefited from momentum. He did not tell himself it was because of the bridge at Cordon, or the ledgers, or the burgundy dress, or the voice that used words for information rather than atmosphere. He was not going to examine those details. He was here for Rosalind. The arrangement was with Rosalind. The fortune that would repair the Ashworth roof and settle the last of his father's creditors and restore the tenant cottages deteriorating since before his inheritance. That fortune was attached to Rosalind. He arrived at 11. He was shown to the drawing room. Mrs. Dalworth was there. Kellaway was there. Rosalind was there, in primrose yellow this time, positioned by the same window with the same immaculate warmth. Jessamine was not there. He noticed her absence the way one notices a sound that has stopped, not immediately, but with a growing awareness that something previously present had been removed, and the room was altered without it. "Miss Jessamine is occupied this morning," Kellaway said, reading something in the Duke's expression that the Duke had not intended to display. "The quarterly accounts." "Of course," Soren said. The morning proceeded. He walked the grounds with Rosalind and Mrs. Dalworth, and Rosalind was charming about the gardens and knowledgeable about her father's improvements, and her hand on his arm was light and correct, and everything about the morning was exactly as it should have been. And then, on the path along the eastern boundary, he saw Jessamine. She was in the far field, beyond the ornamental gardens, in a part of the estate that visitors were not shown. She was on horseback, not side saddle, he noted, and she was with a man he recognized as a land surveyor, and they were standing at the edge of a drainage channel, and she was pointing at something on the survey map with the focused authority of a person solving a problem that mattered to her. She had not seen him. She was not performing for anyone. She was simply working. He watched her for 4 seconds, longer than the pause in the walk could naturally accommodate, and then turned back to Rosalind, who was saying something about the roses, and who had seen exactly where he had been looking, and whose smile, for the first time since he had met her, contained something other than calibrated warmth. It contained the faintest edge of a question she was never going to ask. The courtship of Rosalind Kellaway proceeded through October with the mechanical regularity of a well-managed campaign. Soren visited Thornfeld every Thursday. Mrs. Dalworth arranged each occasion with the strategic precision of a woman who believed that predictability bred comfort, and comfort bred commitment. There were walks in the grounds. There were afternoon teas. There were conversations about the season and the county and the future of the Ashworth estate that were perfectly pleasant and perfectly adequate, and left him each Thursday evening on the ride back to Ashworth Hall with the particular restlessness of a man who had eaten a full meal and was still, somehow, hungry. Rosalind was faultless. This was the problem, though he would not have called it a problem. She agreed with his observations. She deferred to his judgment on matters of the estate. She laughed at the appropriate moments and was quiet at the appropriate moments, and never once said anything that surprised him, which should have been a comfort, and was instead becoming something he could not name and did not want to examine. Jessamine, meanwhile, was everywhere and nowhere. She was never present at the Thursday visits. This, he understood, was by design. Kellaway's design, or Mrs. Dalworth's, or possibly her own. And he did not ask which, because asking would have required him to explain why her absence was notable, and he was not prepared to provide that explanation to anyone, least of all himself. But she was present in the estate. He saw the evidence of her, the way one reads a letter by its effects rather than its words. The drainage channel he had seen her surveying in September had been redesigned by mid-October. He learned this from Kellaway during a Thursday visit, mentioned in passing, the way significant things were often mentioned. The tenant cottages on the Thornfeld north boundary had been re-roofed. The quarterly accounts, which Kellaway referenced once with the understated pride of a father who knew what he had, were apparently ahead of projection for the third consecutive year. Jessamine handles the accounts, Kellaway said, in the same tone a man might use to say the sun handles the daylight. Soren said nothing. He noted it with the quiet, precise attention he brought to everything, and he filed it alongside the bridge at Cordon and the drainage channel and the survey map and the woman on horseback who had not been performing for anyone. On the second Thursday of October, the pattern broke. He arrived at Thornfeld at 11, as usual, and was shown to the drawing room, as usual. And Mrs. Dalworth was there, and Kellaway was there, and Rosalind was there in autumn gold by her window. And Jessamine was there. She was sitting at the writing desk in the far corner of the room, with a ledger open and a letter half written. And she looked up when he entered. Working, interrupted, deciding in real time how much of her attention the interruption warranted. "Your Grace," she said. "Miss Jessamine," he said. She held his gaze for one beat, not the assessing look from their first meeting, but something more settled than that. Something more settled. An assessment already completed. His presence acknowledged with the minimum social investment required before returning to work. She returned to work. He spent the next 90 minutes in conversation with Rosalind about the winter social calendar, while Jessamine's pen scratched steadily in the corner of the room. And he was aware of that sound, the way a man standing near a hearth is aware of the fire. Not looking at it directly, not acknowledging its warmth, but oriented toward it nonetheless. At one point, Kellaway mentioned the Ashworth Bridge. "The committee approved the funding last week," Soren said. "Repairs begin in November." He had not been looking at Jessamine when he said it, but he had been speaking to her. He knew it. And from the brief, almost imperceptible pause in the scratching of her pen, she knew it too. November arrived with the first hard frost, and that quality of Derbyshire light that made everything look carved from the same pale stone. The bridge repairs at Cordon had begun, and Soren was there on a Monday morning to review the progress with his steward, because he was a man who reviewed things personally, and because the bridge mattered, and because, though he would not have said this aloud, it was the bridge that had first told him something important, and he wanted to see it handled correctly. He was examining the new abutment stonework when he heard hooves on the lane above. Jessamine came down the Cordon Road on a bay mare at a working pace, not a social ride, but the purposeful movement of a woman going somewhere specific for a reason that had nothing to do with chance. She was carrying a leather folio, and she pulled up when she saw him with composed directness. She dismounted efficiently, without waiting for assistance, and walked to the edge of the bank. "The limestone is local," she said. Brockworth Quarry. Yes. Good. The previous abutment was sandstone, which is why it failed. Sandstone absorbs water. In a frost cycle, it fractures from the inside. She met his eyes. You knew this. I knew this. Then why did your father's steward use sandstone in the first repair? The question landed with the precision of a surveyor's stake. Direct, grounded, and exactly where it needed to be. It was not an accusation. She saw inefficiency as a personal affront, and she wanted to understand its origin. He answered her honestly, because dishonesty in her presence felt structurally impossible. Because my father's steward chose materials based on cost rather than suitability, he said. And my father did not question him, because my father did not question expenditures of any kind, which is the reason I am standing at this bridge, reviewing stonework, instead of attending to the 40 other matters that require my attention this morning. It was more than he had intended to say, considerably more than he had told anyone about his father's financial legacy, including his own steward, including Mrs. Dalworth. She did not offer sympathy. She was not a woman who deployed sympathy as a social reflex. What crossed her face was recognition. The steady regard of a person who understood inherited problems and the particular weight of solving them without help. The folio, he said, because the silence was becoming something he would have to account for. Estate business. The Thornfeld Timber Survey. I am meeting the forester at Lindhall Wood. The mature oaks need assessment before winter. If we delay the coppicing, we lose a season's charcoal revenue. The Ashworth timber borders the Thornfeld North Stand. If your forester is competent, I would be interested in his assessment of the boundary trees. I will send you his report. Send it to me directly, he said. Not through your father. Not through Mrs. Dalworth. Something shifted in her expression. Not a softening, but a recalibration. A person being moved, carefully and deliberately, from one category to another. Directly, she said. She mounted the mare and rode toward Lindhall Wood. He watched her go for 5 seconds longer than any professional interest in timber surveys could justify, then turned back to the bridge and the steward, who was waiting with the patience of a man who had noticed everything and intended to say nothing. The forester's report arrived at Ashworth Hall on Thursday morning. It was thorough, precise, and accompanied by a note in Jessamine's hand that was 3 sentences long and contained no pleasantries, just the data, the recommendation, and her initials. He read the note twice. He read the report once. He put the note in the top drawer of his desk, where he kept correspondence that required further consideration. He told himself this was about the timber. The forester's report led to a second letter. The second letter led to a reply. The reply led to a question about the Thornfeld drainage redesign, which led to a detailed response that included a hand-drawn diagram of the new channel gradient, which led to a counter-question about the Ashworth South Meadow irrigation, which led to a correspondence that neither of them had planned and neither of them was willing to interrupt. The letters were professional. They were specific. They were about land and timber and water management and the practical realities of running neighboring estates in Derbyshire, and they were entirely correct, and they arrived with a frequency that was not entirely correct. Every 2 or 3 days, sometimes daily, always in her hand rather than a secretary's, always signed with her initials rather than her full name, which was a small informality that he noticed and did not mention and did not want to stop. He continued to visit Thornfeld on Thursdays. He continued to sit with Rosalind in the drawing room and walk with her in the grounds and discuss the winter season and the county society and the future that Mrs. Dalworth was constructing for them with the architectural patience of a cathedral builder. Rosalind continued to be graceful and agreeable and perfectly suited to everything he had asked for. And twice a week, sometimes 3 times, a letter arrived from Jessamine about drainage, or timber, or the county road fund, or the price of Derbyshire wool, and he answered every one, and his answers grew longer as November deepened, and hers grew longer in return, and at no point did either of them write a single word about what was actually happening. The first time they were alone together without planning it was on a Wednesday in the third week of November. He was riding the Ashworth boundary, the northern edge, where his land ran against the Thornfeld timber, and she was at the boundary gate, on foot, with the forester and a measuring chain, surveying the mature oaks they had discussed in the letters. She saw him before he reached the gate. She dismissed the forester with a word and a gesture that spoke of natural authority, and she was standing at the boundary when he arrived, with the measuring chain over one arm and her breath visible in the November cold. "Your Grace," she said. "Miss Jessamine." He dismounted. They stood on opposite sides of the boundary gate, his land, her land, the oak trees older than both families' claims, standing above them with the serene indifference of things that had been there long before either estate existed and would be there long after. "The boundary oaks," she said. "3 of them are on the Thornfeld side. 2 are on yours. The 7th," she pointed to the largest, a tree of considerable age and presence that stood almost exactly on the property line, "is disputed." "Disputed?" he said. "The Thornfeld deed places it 6 feet inside our boundary. The Ashworth estate map from 1762 places it 4 feet inside yours. The tree itself, being a tree, has no opinion on the matter." He watched her. Something happened at the corner of his mouth that he suppressed before it became a smile, but not quickly enough, and she saw it. And something happened at the corner of her mouth in response that she did not suppress at all. It was the first time he had seen her smile. It was not Rosalind's smile, not calibrated, not designed to make a room comfortable. It was sharp and quick and real, the expression of genuine pleasure at her own joke, and she did not care whether it was appropriate. He found it, against every rational assessment of his situation, devastating. "I propose," he said, and heard the word land differently than he had intended, "that we engage a surveyor to resolve the boundary question. One surveyor, jointly commissioned, rather than competing claims." "A joint commission," she said. "That is unexpectedly collaborative for a duke." "I have found," he said, "that competing surveys tend to produce competing conclusions, and competing conclusions tend to produce solicitors, and solicitors tend to produce invoices. I prefer resolution to revenue for the legal profession." She regarded him with the expression that was becoming familiar, the one that said she was filing something away for later analysis, something about him that did not fit the category she had originally assigned. "I accept the proposal," she said, "on the condition that I select the surveyor." "On what basis?" "On the basis that I have engaged 4 surveyors in the past 2 years, and know which ones are competent. And you have engaged your father's steward for the past 6 years, and know which stonework fails in a frost." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of 2 people who had just said something to each other that was not about a tree, and who both knew it, and who were not yet ready to say what it was actually about. "Agreed," he said. She extended her hand across the boundary gate. He took it, a working hand in a glove that was well made and ink-stained at the index finger, and shook it with the grip of a man who was beginning to understand that the arrangement he had come to Thornfeld to make was not the arrangement he was actually making. "Good morning, Your Grace." "Good morning, Miss Jessamine." She collected the measuring chain and walked back toward the Thornfeld timber line. He watched her go. He mounted his horse and rode the boundary back to Ashworth, and the oak tree stood on the property line between them, belonging to neither estate in both, and the November wind moved through its bare branches with a sound that did not care whose land it was standing on. That evening, he sat at his desk and looked at the stack of her letters, 11 now. The first about the forester's report, and the most recent about the Boundary Oaks. And he thought about the courtship of Rosalind Kellaway, which was proceeding on schedule and according to plan, and about the correspondence with Jessamine Kellaway, which was proceeding on no schedule at all and according to nothing he recognized. He thought about what it meant to visit a house every Thursday, to see one woman and spend the ride home thinking about the other. He thought about the fortune attached to Rosalind, and the debts attached to Ashworth, and the tenant cottages, and the bridge, and the roof, and the simple arithmetic of obligation. And he thought about a woman at a boundary gate who had made a joke about a tree having no opinion, and had smiled the sharp, quick, real smile, and had shaken his hand with ink on her glove. And he understood, with the clarity of someone who had been managing accounts his entire adult life, that the arithmetic was no longer simple. The winter assembly at Bratherton Hall fell in early December. 50 people, the full county, the opening performance of the social calendar that would run through spring. Mrs. Dalworth had arranged for Soren and Rosalind to arrive in proximity, which meant arriving separately but within the same quarter hour, so the room would register them as a pair without the impropriety of a shared carriage. It was, like everything Mrs. Dalworth constructed, technically unimpeachable and entirely transparent. Rosalind arrived in silver blue silk that caught the candlelight with the precision of a woman who understood what fabric did under what conditions. She was beautiful. The room noticed. Mrs. Dalworth, positioned near the fireplace, with the strategic awareness of a general overlooking a field, noticed the room noticing, and was satisfied. Jessamine arrived with her father at 8:30. She wore dark green, not the fashionable pale greens of the season, but a deep, serious green that said nothing about candles and everything about the woman wearing it. She found a place near the window and stood there with the self-sufficiency of a person who attended social events the way she attended to drainage, because it was necessary, not because it was preferred. The evening proceeded through its circuits. Soren talked with the Brathertons about the winter road program. He talked with Rosalind about the London season, which Mrs. Dalworth had suggested would be the appropriate venue for a formal announcement. He was aware, throughout the evening, of where Jessamine was in the room, not watching her, but tracking her position with an internal compass he had not authorized and could not dismantle. At 9 o'clock, Lord Cavender appeared at Jessamine's elbow. Cavender was a baronet of 56 who had inherited his title and his opinions from a father who had held both since before the American War, and who regarded the county's social order as a fixed constellation in which every star had been assigned its position at birth. He was not cruel. He was something more durable than cruel. He was certain. "Miss Kellaway," Cavender said, pitched for the 6 people within hearing. "I understand you have been advising your father on the Thornfeld timber. Quite the undertaking for a young woman." "I manage the Thornfeld accounts and estate operations," Jessamine said. "The timber is one component." "Indeed," Cavender said, with a smile that considered the word a sufficient commentary. "One does admire the energy of new families in the county. Such enthusiasm for—" The pause was architectural, load-bearing, designed to hold the weight of what came next. Involvement. 4 people turned slightly. 2 more adjusted their attention. The room, which had been flowing, developed a local stillness around the conversation. Jessamine had heard this before. Not these exact words, but this exact music. The melody that said, "You are new, you are commerce, you are tolerated, but not established." She was formulating her response, and her responses had the structural integrity of load-bearing walls, when she heard the Duke's voice. "The Thornfeld timber assessment," Soren said, arriving at the conversation with unhurried precision. "Identified a boundary issue my own steward had missed for 6 years. Miss Jessamine's analysis of the drainage gradient solved a flooding problem affecting Ashworth land since before my father's death. He held Cavender's gaze with the complete, focused attention that dukes possessed and baronets aspired to, the attention that carried 300 years of Derbyshire in it and understood what it weighed. The county benefits from landowners who take their property seriously and manage it competently. I should think we are all in agreement on that. He held Cavender's gaze one beat longer than the social register required, which was the aristocratic equivalent of a hand on a man's shoulder. Cavender's smile underwent a rapid restructuring. Of course. Quite so. I merely, Miss Jessamine, Soren said, turning to her with the ease of a man concluding one conversation and beginning another. Sir Hadrian mentioned you had thoughts on the County Drainage Fund. I have been considering a proposal to the committee. I would value your perspective. He offered her this, not rescue, not protection, but professional recognition in a room that had been giving her social tolerance. He offered it as though it were the most natural thing in the world, because a man who valued competence would naturally seek the most competent person available, and her gender and her father's money had nothing to do with it. She met his gaze for 2 seconds longer than the social register accommodated, and in those 2 seconds, something moved across her expression that was not gratitude, but acknowledgement, the recognition of a very specific intelligence, the kind that defended without diminishing, that elevated without patronizing, that made Cavender's position untenable, not by attacking it, but by simply proceeding as though it didn't exist. The drainage fund, she said, her voice steady. I have several thoughts. Shall we discuss them over supper? They walked toward the supper room together, and behind them, Cavender found someone else to talk to, with the quiet haste of a man who had been corrected in public and needed time to rebuild his certainty, and the room noted all of it, the correction, the walk, the pairing, and the room, being Derbyshire, began the careful, comprehensive process of revising its assumptions. Rosalind found Jessamine in the cloakroom at the end of the evening. This was the moment Jessamine had been expecting, not from Mrs. Dalworth, not from her father, but from Rosalind, because Rosalind was many things Jessamine was not. Graceful where Jessamine was direct, warm where Jessamine was precise. But she was not unobservant. And the quality of attention the Duke had directed at her sister over the course of the evening was not something that went unnoticed by a woman receiving his formal courtship for 2 months. He defended you, Rosalind said. She was standing by the mirror. She was not looking in it. He corrected Cavender. It was about the county, not about me. Jessamine. Rosalind's voice contained something with edges. He crossed the room. Jessamine was silent. I have been in rooms with the Duke of Ashworth for 2 months. He does not cross rooms. He manages them from wherever he is standing. He has never moved toward anything in my presence. She paused. He moved toward you. I'm not angry, Rosalind continued. There is no engagement. There is only an understanding between Mrs. Dalworth and father, not between the Duke and me. But I am not blind. People assume that because I am agreeable, I do not see things. I see everything. I simply choose not to remark upon it. Her voice did not waver. I am remarking now. I have not encouraged him, Jessamine said. I know. That is what makes it remarkable. What do you want me to do? I want you to stop pretending that the letters are about drainage. 14 letters in 5 weeks, from a man who writes to his own solicitors once a month. They are not about drainage. Some of them are about drainage, Jessamine said. Rosalind almost smiled, smaller and sadder, and more genuine than anything Jessamine had seen on her sister's face in years. I will speak to Mrs. Dalworth. The understanding can be dissolved without scandal if it is done early. She held up a hand. This is not a sacrifice. I am choosing not to marry a man who crosses rooms for someone else. That is not nobility. That is arithmetic. She picked up her gloves. Tell him about the letters, not what is in them, that he should stop pretending. She left the cloakroom. Jessamine stood alone and thought about 14 letters, and a man who had crossed a room, and about a sister who had seen everything and chosen to open the door rather than stand in front of it. He came to Thornfeld on a Saturday, which was not a Thursday, which meant it was not part of the arrangement, which meant it was something else entirely, and both of them knew it before he had dismounted. Jessamine was in the East Orchard. She had been pruning the winter pears since 7 in the morning, with the focused intensity of a woman converting restlessness into productivity, which was her preferred method of managing any emotional state that did not submit to analysis. She heard the horse on the lane. She set down the pruning saw and walked to the orchard gate, because she was done pretending their meetings were accidental. He came through the gate on foot, in a riding coat that was practical rather than fashionable, the detail she always noticed, the one that told her he was here as himself rather than his title. You are pruning. Trees do not observe the social calendar. He almost smiled. She almost let him. The December morning hung between them, clear and cold and unwilling to accommodate imprecision. I came to say something, he said. She waited. I have been managing this situation as though it were a boundary dispute, something that could be resolved through correspondence and professional courtesy. And I have been wrong, and I need to say that to you before this goes any further. The courtship with Rosalind, he said. I entered it for financial reasons that were real and pressing. The Ashworth debts are real. Everything I said to Rosalind was true in the sense that the facts were accurate. He studied the nearest pear tree, but facts can be accurate and still be the wrong answer. I described what I needed as though it were a specification, and Rosalind met every specification, and I have spent 2 months understanding that meeting specifications is not the same thing as being the right person. And I have spent 2 months writing letters about drainage to a woman who was the right person from the moment she walked into the drawing room with ledgers under her arm and told me that precision was useful. Rosalind knows, Jessamine said. Something moved in his expression. She told me at Bratherton. She said you crossed the room. She said you do not cross rooms. She paused. She said the letters are not about drainage. They are not about drainage, he said. I owe Rosalind an apology, he said. A direct one. Yes. I owe your father an explanation. Yes. And I owe you the truth, which is that I came for an arrangement and found something I was not looking for, and I have been pretending not to find it, because the arithmetic was simpler with Rosalind, and because I was afraid that what I actually wanted would not want me in return. She watched him in the December orchard and thought about 14 letters and a boundary oak and a bridge at Cordon and a man in a practical coat who had come on a Saturday because Saturday was not Thursday, and he needed her to know the difference. You are not wrong about the foundation, she said. Something behind his expression braced. A man who comes to court one sister and discovers he has been writing to the other about drainage for 5 weeks is not a man with a strong opening position. She paused. But I have found, in my experience with accounts, that the opening position is less important than the willingness to revise when the evidence changes. She met his eyes. The evidence has changed, she said. He took 1 step toward her. She did not step back. The orchard held them in the December quiet, the pear trees bare and patient above them, the pruning saw on the frozen ground. I am going to speak to your father, he said. You should speak to Rosalind first. She deserves that. Yes, she does. The pruning. Is it finished? The pruning is extensive. It will take the rest of the morning. Then I will come back this afternoon, after I have spoken to Rosalind, after I have spoken to your father. That is a great deal of speaking for one day. I have been insufficiently direct for 2 months. I intend to compensate. The corner of her mouth, the sharp, quick, real expression that was not a smile and was better than any smile he had ever been offered, appeared and held. He walked back through the orchard gate. She picked up the pruning saw and stood among the pear trees, and did not resume pruning for some time. He spoke to Rosalind first. He went to Thornfeld that afternoon, as he had said he would, and asked to see Miss Rosalind, and was shown to the drawing room, the same window, the same chair, and Rosalind was there, and she was not smiling, and the absence of the smile was a form of honesty she was offering him before he had begun. "I know why you have come," she said. Her voice was even and contained no bitterness and no warmth and no performance of any kind. It was the first time he had heard her actual voice. "Jessamine told me you would come before you spoke to my father, because she told you I deserved that, and she was correct." "I owe you an apology," he said. "You owe me honesty," she said. "An apology implies you did something wrong. You did something human. You came looking for one thing and found another, and you spent 2 months trying to make it match because the arithmetic was more convenient. That is not a wrong. That is a man who is slower than his own feelings, and I have been watching it happen since the 2nd Thursday in October." "The 2nd Thursday," he said. "The day she was in the room. You mentioned the Cordon Bridge, and she stopped writing. You were looking at me, but you were speaking to her." She paused. "I knew then." He studied her. "You are not what I expected." "No, people rarely are when they stop performing." Her gaze went to the window. Her window, the one she had stood at for 2 months in pale blue and primrose yellow and silver silk. "I have been performing since I was 14. It is a skill of diminishing value." She looked back at him. "Go and speak to my father. Then go and speak to my sister, who has been pruning pear trees since 7 o'clock this morning, because she does not know what to do with her hands when she is waiting for something she wants." She extended her hand. Her handshake was firm, brief, and entirely different from her sister's. A closing transaction conducted with clarity and without sentiment. "Be worth it," she said. "She is my sister. She is extraordinary, and she does not know it. And she will never believe it if you tell her. You will have to show her through sustained evidence." She paused. "But you are a man who replaced sandstone with limestone. You understand correct materials." He went to Kellaway next. The conversation was brief, because Kellaway was a man who valued clarity over circumlocution. "I came to court Rosalind," Soren said. "I wish to marry Jessamine." Kellaway regarded him with the expression of a man who had raised 2 daughters and understood both, and had been waiting for this conversation with the patient attention he brought to markets. Rosalind? She was generous, and direct, and more perceptive than I had understood. "Rosalind is considerably more than she allows people to see," Kellaway said. "You noticed the wrong daughter, but you noticed. That is more than most manage." He set down his pen. "The settlement I discussed with Mrs. Dalworth was attached to Rosalind. A new arrangement will require new terms. It will be fair and generous. But the number is not why you are here." "No, it is not." "I know," Kellaway said. "I have read the letters, not the contents. I would not read my daughter's correspondence. But I can count, Your Grace. 14 letters in 5 weeks. I built a textile empire. I know what frequency of correspondence means when it is not commercially required." He stood. "Go and find her. She has been in the orchard since dawn, and no one prunes pear trees for 9 hours without a reason that has nothing to do with pear trees." The December light was fading when he reached the orchard. Jessamine was at the far end, by the stone wall, the pruning saw on the ground. She was sitting on the wall, looking at the Ashworth land beyond the boundary. She saw him coming through the bare pear trees. She did not stand. "I spoke to Rosalind," he said. "I know. She told me to be worth it." "That sounds like Rosalind, the version of Rosalind I have only recently met." "I spoke to your father." "I know. He came 20 minutes ago. He said, 'Stop pruning. The trees are beginning to look frightened.' And then he left." Something happened to his expression that he did not suppress, and was finished suppressing. "Jessamine," he said. Her name, the 4 syllables that meant ledgers and drainage and boundary oaks, and letters that were not about drainage. "Soren," she said. It was the first time she had used his name, and it landed between them like the surveyor's stake at Cordon, direct, grounded, and precisely where it needed to be. "I came to Thornfeld with a list of specifications and the expectation that the matter would be straightforward. Then you walked in with ledgers under your arm and told me precision was useful, and nothing has been straightforward since." Her eyes drifted to the December sky behind his head. "I want to say something," she said. "When you came in September, I walked into that drawing room by accident. Wrong corridor. Mrs. Dalworth had rearranged the furniture. I came through the door without knowing you were there." She studied her hands. "I saw you, and I understood immediately what was happening, and I felt something I am not going to describe, because I have spent my life being the practical one while Rosalind stands by windows in beautiful dresses. I was not prepared for the cruelty of seeing a man I had never met, and understanding in 3 seconds that I was going to find him interesting, and that he was there for my sister." The orchard was very still. Then at luncheon, you mentioned the Cordon Bridge, and I said something because I could not help myself. And you looked at me the way people look at accounts or drainage plans, like I contained information worth paying attention to. No one had ever looked at me like that at a dinner table. Not while Rosalind was in the room. He stepped toward her. She stood from the wall. They were close. Closer than the boundary gate. Closer than the bridge. Closer than the orchard gate that morning. "I want to marry you," he said. "Not because of the fortune, though I will not pretend otherwise, because you would see through it in 3 seconds. Not because of the drainage or the timber, though I find your competence unreasonably compelling. I want to marry you because you walked into a room and solved a naming problem in 1 sentence, and I have been revising every assumption since, and the revised version is better than anything I had planned." She put her hand on his arm. Flat, deliberate. "Yes." "Yes?" "I have been waiting for you to reach the correct conclusion since approximately the 2nd week of October. I had estimated January. You are 6 weeks ahead of my projection, which I am noting for future reference." He kissed her. It had the honesty of a man who had been revising his position for 2.5 months and was not willing to defer any longer. She kissed him back with the same precision she brought to accounts and drainage plans and every true thing she had ever decided. And the orchard was cold, and the pear trees did not require further pruning, and neither of them cared. When they separated, she kept her hand on his arm. "The Ashworth accounts," she said. "I want to see them, all of them, before the wedding." "You want to audit the estate you are marrying into?" "I do not enter arrangements without reviewing the full accounts. And if they are as bad as I have suggested, then I will fix them," she said. "I have been fixing accounts since I was 16. He looked at her in the fading light, among the pear trees, and he understood, with the certainty of a man who had spent 6 years replacing sandstone with limestone, that this was the correct material, and it would not fail in any frost. Mrs. Dalworth called on Thornfeld the following Wednesday, with the contained energy of a woman who had been informed of a development that deviated significantly from her design. She found both sisters in the drawing room, Jessamine at the writing desk, Rosalind on the settee, and Kellaway by the fire, and their expressions told her the conversation had already happened without her, which was an experience Mrs. Dalworth had not had in 30 years of arranging things and did not enjoy. "He chose you," Mrs. Dalworth said to Jessamine. "He chose correctly," Rosalind said from the settee. Her voice was calm and contained no injury. "I am not going to pretend otherwise. The Duke found what he was not looking for. I would rather he found it honestly than married me conveniently." Mrs. Dalworth studied Rosalind for a long time, with the recalibrating attention of a woman discovering that a category she had assigned at 14 required significant revision. "You are handling this remarkably," Mrs. Dalworth said. "I am handling it practically," Rosalind said, "which is something I learned from my sister, though neither of us realized it at the time." Mrs. Dalworth turned to Jessamine. She saw something she had not been looking for because she had not considered it a variable. A woman already wearing the Duke of Ashworth's future, the way she wore her working dresses, practically, without performance, and with the quiet certainty of someone who intended to make it function. "I arranged the wrong sister," Mrs. Dalworth said. "I do not often admit error, but when I do, I prefer to admit it to the person who benefited from it." "You arranged the meeting," Jessamine said. "Without the meeting, none of this would have occurred." "I arranged a meeting for Rosalind," Mrs. Dalworth said. "You arranged a meeting at which I walked through the wrong door. The result is the same. The method was simply less efficient than your usual standard." Mrs. Dalworth regarded her with the expression of a woman who had just been managed with her own tools, and who found the experience both irritating and deeply satisfying. The engagement was announced in the first week of January. Derbyshire received the news with the comprehensive attention of a county that had formed approximately 17 theories about the Thornfeld situation, none of which had involved the elder daughter. The county adjusted, not quickly, not enthusiastically, but with the methodical thoroughness of people who understood that social order occasionally required accommodation. Lady Bratherton called on Thornfeld and pronounced Jessamine surprising but sound, which from Lady Bratherton was equivalent to a full endorsement. Sir Hadrian Oak said he had suspected something and was pleased to be proven correct, which was not entirely accurate, but was graciously meant. Lord Cavender said nothing. This was noted. The engagement dinner was held at Ashworth Hall in the third week of January. 40 people, the full county, the table arranged by Jessamine, who had spent 2 days redesigning the seating with the strategic attention she brought to drainage plans. She sat at Soren's right and talked with Sir Hadrian about the drainage fund and with Lady Bratherton about the Ashworth tenant cottages, which she had inspected the previous week, and about which she had opinions that Lady Bratherton found refreshingly specific. Cavender was seated at the center of the long side, included and required to behave, visible enough to be observed and distant enough to be managed. Rosalind was at the table in pale blue, managing her end with the grace that had always been genuine, and 2 young men from the neighboring county spent the evening competing for her attention with an enthusiasm that suggested Rosalind Kellaway's story was not ending. It was beginning a different chapter. Her father watched her across the candles with the quiet, sustained pride of a man who had decided when she was 12 that his elder daughter was either a liability or an advantage, and had been right about the latter for 12 years, and was now watching the advantage compound. At the end of the dinner, Cavender approached Jessamine. "My congratulations on the engagement," he said. Then, lower, for her alone, "I spoke carelessly at the assembly. I want you to know that I'm aware of it." She saw something she had not expected, not contrition, but adjustment. the recalibration of a man who had encountered evidence that his fixed position required revision. "I appreciate you saying so," she said. And she meant it, which surprised her. Soren found her near the window at the end of the evening, the January dark pressing against the glass. "Cavender apologized," she said. "I saw." "You were watching." "I have been watching since September," he said. "It is my primary occupation." She studied the drawing room, his drawing room, which would be her drawing room, which would be a room she worked in rather than performed in. "I'm going to be very good at this," she said. "I know," he said. "I have seen your accounts." Her father found her near the end of the evening, at the edge of the room, with a glass of wine, and the quiet satisfaction of a woman who had redesigned a dining room and watched it perform exactly as projected. "Well," he said. "Well," she said. He glanced at Soren across the room, managing the occasion with the ease of long practice, but doing it tonight with a quality neither of them had seen before. Something lighter, small but unmistakable. "Is he good enough for you?" Kellaway said. She thought about it with the honesty the question deserved. "He's trying to be," she said. "That is the best version of the answer." "It is the best version," her father agreed. He regarded her with the attention that had never in 30 years missed anything important. "You are going to be a magnificent duchess." "I know," she said. "I intend to be." He laughed, the full, genuine laugh of a man who had spent 30 years being proud of this person and had decided tonight was the correct occasion to let it show entirely. They were married in March, at the church in Cordon Village, the village with the bridge with the limestone. Jessamine had chosen the church, and when Soren asked why, she said, "Because the bridge is where you told me the truth about your father, and I decided then that you were a man who could be trusted with difficult information, and a marriage is a great deal of difficult information managed over a very long time. Most women choose a church for the windows. The windows are adequate. The foundation is what matters." She wore dark green. Rosalind helped her dress that morning, fastening buttons with steady hands, and the quiet intimacy of sisters who had recently discovered they were closer than either had realized. "You look like yourself," Rosalind said. "Is that a compliment?" "It is the highest compliment I know how to give. Not a bride, not a duchess, like Jessamine." Kellaway walked her to the front of the church. His arm was steady. His expression held 30 years of attention. The attention of a man who had understood what this person would become before anyone else, and was now handing her to a man who had taken 2.5 months to see what Kellaway had seen in 12 years. "Fix his accounts," Kellaway said, before he released her arm. "I intend to," she said. Soren looked at her at the front of the church in dark green, and he thought about September and the drawing room and the woman with ledgers under her arm. He thought about the Cordon Bridge and the sandstone and the boundary oak and 14 letters and a December orchard and a woman who had said yes and then immediately requested an audit. Jessamine looked at him with the sharp, direct, real expression that was hers alone, the one that said she saw him completely, with total attention and no sentimentality, and the absolute commitment of a woman who did not enter arrangements without understanding exactly what she was taking on. She took his hand. Not a handshake across a boundary gate, not a glove with ink at the index finger extended across professional distance. She took his hand, the way she took on problems, directly, deliberately, and with the full intention of not letting go. He held it the way she recognized, firm, certain, the hold of someone who meant what he agreed to. And he didn't let go. The wedding breakfast was at Ashworth Hall, the dining room redesigned, the table moved, the glare resolved. Rosalind found her in the garden afterward, in the March light, soft, golden, turning the county into something designed for exactly this kind of ending. "I am happy for you," Rosalind said. "I want you to know that it is real." "I know. You told me to stop pretending the letters were about drainage. A woman who was not happy for me would not have done that. A woman who was not happy for you might have stood in the doorway instead of opening it." Jessamine looked at her sister. "You are going to be extraordinary, not as someone's wife, as yourself." "I know," Rosalind said. "I have recently discovered that I am considerably more interesting than I was allowing myself to be." "You were always interesting. You were performing for the wrong audience." Rosalind took her hand. Two sisters in a March garden, in a county that had been watching them both and had only recently begun to see them clearly. Soren found her after Rosalind had gone, standing at the edge of the garden, looking at the boundary line, the distant oak on the property line between two estates that were now, in every sense, one. "Jessamine," he said. "Yes." "You walked into that drawing room by accident. Mrs. Dalworth had moved the furniture." "Yes." "If she had not moved it, you would not have come through that door, and I would have married Rosalind, and the bridge would have been repaired with the wrong stonework, and I would never have known that the woman I was supposed to find was one corridor away, managing the accounts. That is considerable weight to place on furniture arrangement. Mrs. Dalworth moved a settee, and everything followed." "Everything followed," Jessamine said, "from the fact that I was carrying ledgers, and I said that precision was useful. The settee was infrastructure. The sentence was the foundation." She took his hand. He held it. The March evening settled around them, unhurried and indifferent to whether any of it had been part of the original arrangement. The best decisions, her father had always said, were the ones that survived an audit. This one, she knew, would hold.